The blanket arrives at 234 hours, November 3rd, 1972, Fire Support Base Davidson, Quang Ngai Province. 15 North Vietnamese women, POWs, transferred from South Vietnamese custody to American processing facility. Evening arrival, late transport. Women exhausted from travel. Standard processing postponed until morning. Women directed to holding barracks for the night. Except what happens when US Marine Corporal David Chen, age 25, night duty officer, notices the women shivering in the unheated barracks despite being in sleeping bags. Except what happens when he returns 15 minutes later carrying armloads of wool blankets from supply. Except what happens when he quietly distributes them to each woman without saying anything beyond, "You looked cold, these will help." Except what happens when Nguyen Thi Mai, age 24, takes the blanket with trembling hands and starts crying before she even unfolds it. US Army Captain Jennifer Walsh, processing officer, age 31, observes this scene from the doorway. She watches Vietnamese women stare at blankets like they're receiving something impossible, watches them touch the wool fabric carefully, reverently watches them wrap blankets around themselves and cry quietly as him, watches them whisper to each other in Vietnamese about Americans giving them blankets when they expected Americans to give them nothing except hardship. This is the story of November 3rd in 1972, when 15 Vietnamese women POWs received blankets from American soldiers who noticed they were cold and decided to help without being asked, without following orders, without expecting anything in return. How a simple act of unprompted kindness contradicted everything propaganda taught about American cruelty. How blankets given freely became proof of American humanity. How noticing someone's discomfort and alleviating it without being told to do so revealed character more clearly than any grand gesture could. How the simplest kindness, offering warmth to cold people, taught more about American values than years of propaganda could obscure. If you want stories about unexpected kindness defeating propaganda, where simple human decency contradicts systematic lies and blankets teach truth about character, hit subscribe, because what happens when Chen gives those women blankets reveals everything about the difference between propaganda promises and experienced reality, about enemies who notice discomfort and respond with kindness without being ordered, about Americans who see suffering and alleviate it automatically because that's what decent people do, about the power of unprompted acts of consideration to shatter carefully constructed beliefs about enemy character, about how Americans being themselves, soldiers who notice when people are cold and get blankets to help, contradicts propaganda through kindness that propaganda claimed Americans are incapable of feeling toward Vietnamese. What they extracted from American captivity. Before understanding the women's reactions, you need to understand what they expected from American custody. What propaganda promised would happen when captured by Americans. What years of political education prepared them to experience as prisoners. The senior woman among the prisoners, Thi Hanh, age 32, former NVA medical officer, knows the propaganda lessons perfectly. She spent years in political education learning exactly what to expect if captured by Americans, lessons designed to prevent surrender by making captivity seem worse than death. Political Education Session number 203, Standard Curriculum. Americans treat prisoners with deliberate cruelty. Capture by Americans means torture, starvation, exposure to elements, deliberate infliction of suffering. Americans do not follow Geneva Conventions. Americans consider Vietnamese prisoners subhuman and treat them accordingly. Prisoners receive minimum necessary to prevent death. Just enough food to survive, just enough water to live, just enough shelter to avoid immediate death from exposure. Americans provide nothing beyond absolute minimum required to keep prisoners alive for intelligence exploitation. Expect suffering, expect cruelty, expect deliberate deprivation. Americans will not show mercy or kindness. Americans cannot be expected to show basic human consideration. Prepare for hardship. This was propaganda. Systematic lies designed to make surrender seem worse than fighting to death, making captivity appear so terrible that soldiers would choose death over capture, creating expectations of suffering so extreme that any actual captivity experience, even harsh treatment, would seem less terrible than expected, potentially reducing propaganda's deterrent effect. But also ensuring that any kindness received from Americans would contradict expectations so dramatically that it would destroy propaganda credibility immediately. Hanh believed these teachings completely. She prepared herself psychologically for torture and deliberate suffering if captured. She expected Americans to treat her cruelly because propaganda promised systematic American cruelty toward Vietnamese prisoners. She anticipated receiving nothing beyond minimal survival necessities, just enough food and water to prevent death, minimal shelter, no consideration for comfort or dignity. She expected harshness, deprivation, suffering. She expected orders and cruelty. She didn't expect blankets and kindness. Nobody prepared her for Americans who notice prisoners are cold and bring blankets without being asked. Nobody taught her so that Americans might show unprompted consideration for prisoner comfort. Nobody mentioned Americans might act with spontaneous kindness toward enemy captives. Propaganda prepared her for cruelty. Reality is about to deliver kindness. That contradiction, expectations versus experience, is about to destroy everything she believed about American character toward Vietnamese prisoners. 234 hours, the blankets. Nobody ordered him to bring. The barracks where the women are housed for the night is clean and secure but unheated. November in Quang Ngai province can be cool at night, temperatures dropping to 55 or 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Not freezing, but cold enough to be uncomfortable, especially for prisoners who spent months in South Vietnamese facilities with inadequate clothing and are already weakened by poor nutrition and illness. The women have sleeping bags provided by American logistics, but the sleeping bags are intended for warmer weather and don't provide adequate warmth for the cooler night. Chen walks past the barracks around 21:30 hours during his rounds. He notices through the window that the women are huddled in their sleeping bags, shoulders hunched, bodies curled tight, clearly trying to conserve warmth. He can see they're shivering. He can see they're cold. He can see they're uncomfortable. He doesn't have orders to provide additional bedding. Standard protocol provides sleeping bags. Women have sleeping bags. Protocol technically fulfilled. He could continue his rounds and ignore their discomfort. Nobody would fault him. Nobody ordered him to provide anything beyond standard issue. But Chen sees cold people and his immediate instinct is to help. Not because regulations require it, not because someone ordered him, not because it serves any tactical or strategic purpose, simply because he sees those people who are cold and he has access to blankets that would make them warmer. The equation is simple in his mind. Cold people plus available blankets equals go get blankets for the cold people. Basic human decency. Automatic response to observed discomfort. He walks to the supply building, signs out 15 wool blankets from stores. Standard military blankets, thick and warm, designed for cold weather use. He carries them back to the barracks. He enters quietly, not wanting to startle anyone. The women look up nervously when he enters, male American soldier entering at night. Their propaganda-trained minds immediately fearing what this might mean, what orders he might have, what cruelty this night visit might involve. Chen speaks softly through the limited Vietnamese he's learned. "Cold. I see you cold. Blankets help. Here." His Vietnamese is broken and heavily accented, but the meaning is clear. He saw they were cold. He brought blankets to help. He's giving them additional bedding to make them warmer. He moves through the barracks quietly, handing each woman a blanket. No ceremony, no speeches, no demands for gratitude, just simple distribution of warmth to cold people. He gives Mai her blanket with a gentle smile. "This better. You warm now." Mai takes the blanket with hands that tremble from cold and shock. She stares at the thick wool fabric, feels the weight of it, processes what's happening. An American soldier noticed she was cold. An American soldier brought her a blanket. An American soldier is showing concern for her comfort without being ordered to do so. An American soldier is being kind without expecting anything in return. She starts crying before she even unfolds the blanket. The tears come from multiple sources simultaneously: relief at receiving warmth, gratitude for unexpected kindness, confusion about why enemy shows consideration, shock at experiencing gentleness when expecting harshness, and profound cognitive dissonance as experienced reality contradicts everything propaganda taught about American treatment of Vietnamese prisoners. Chen notices her tears and looks concerned. "No sad, blanket good, warm good. You okay?" He's worried he somehow upset her, worried the blanket isn't adequate, worried he did something wrong. He doesn't understand he's destroying years of propaganda through simple kindness. He doesn't know his unprompted consideration is shattering her entire understanding of American character. Mai tries to explain through tears and broken hand gestures and the few English words she knows. "Thank you. Good. You good Americans, not what we taught." "Blanket. Nobody order you. You just see cold. Bring blankets." Chen nods, still looking slightly confused about why this is causing tears. "Yes, you cold. I bring blankets, no order. Just, you cold, I help. That's what people do. See if there's someone cold, help them warm. Simple. For Chen, it is simple. For a Mai, it's revolutionary. The simplicity of his explanation, that's what people do, contradicts everything propaganda taught. Propaganda said Americans are cruel, that Americans don't care about Vietnamese suffering, that Americans will not show unprompted kindness. But Chen just demonstrated that when Americans see suffering, they instinctively respond with help. Not because ordered, not because required, required, because that's what people do. Because basic human decency transcends nationality and war status. Because Americans are humans who respond to observed suffering with assistance. Everything propaganda taught says Americans won't show unprompted kindness to Vietnamese prisoners. Everything Chen just did contradicts that teaching through the simplest possible demonstration: seeing cold people and getting blankets to help them. The whispering that spreads through the barracks, Chen finishes distributing blankets and leaves quietly, returning to his rounds, thinking he just did a simple kindness that required maybe 20 minutes of his time. He has no idea he just transformed 15 women's understanding of American character through wool blankets of basic consideration. As soon as he leaves, the whispering begins. The women wrap themselves in the additional blankets, immediately warmer, the thick wool providing insulation the lighter sleeping bags lacked. But more than the physical warmth, they are processing the psychological impact of receiving unprompted kindness from an American soldier. Mai speaks first to the woman in the bunk beside her, Pham Thi Lan, age 26. "He brought these without being ordered. Did you hear? He said nobody ordered him. He just saw we were cold and brought blankets because that's what people do. He helped us because he saw we were uncomfortable." An American soldier showed unprompted consideration for Vietnamese prisoners' comfort. Nobody told him to do it. He just did it because he noticed we were cold, because he cared enough to help. Lan wraps her blanket tighter, feeling warmth spreading through her body, feeling tears forming. Propaganda said Americans are cruel and will not show kindness to Vietnamese. Said Americans consider us subhuman and will provide only minimum necessary for survival. Said Americans cannot be expected to show basic consideration. But he noticed we were cold and brought blankets without being asked. He showed consideration nobody taught us Americans are capable of showing. He demonstrated kindness propaganda said Americans don't possess toward Vietnamese. One blanket destroys years of teaching about American cruelty. Another woman, Vo Thi Hanh, age 29, joins the quiet conversation. And look at the blankets he brought. These are good blankets. Thick wool. Military issue. Not thin blankets or damaged blankets or the minimum acceptable blankets. Good blankets. The same blankets American soldiers use. He gave us the same quality blankets Americans use for themselves. He didn't bring us inferior supplies. He brought us good supplies. That shows respect. That shows he considers us deserving of the same quality provisions Americans use. That shows he sees us as humans deserving decent treatment, not as enemies deserving minimum provisions. A fourth woman, Nguyen Thi Mai, age 27, adds her observation. And he was gentle, did you notice? He spoke softly, moved carefully, smiled when giving blankets. He seemed concerned when that woman cried. He thought he'd done something wrong, thought she was upset rather than understanding she was crying from gratitude and confusion. He cared about her emotional state. He wanted to help, not just follow rules. You could see in his face and behaviour that he genuinely wanted us to be comfortable. That wasn't performance. That wasn't following regulations. That was human caring about other humans' comfort. That was spontaneous kindness from someone who sees suffering and responds with help automatically. The whispering continues through the barracks. All 15 women processing the same experience, all reaching similar conclusions, all understanding that receiving blankets taught them more about American character than years of propaganda taught about American cruelty, all discovering that Americans show unprompted kindness, that Americans notice suffering and respond with help, that Americans treat prisoners with consideration propaganda claimed Americans are incapable of feeling, all changed by blankets, all transformed by simple kindness, all learning truth through experiencing consideration when expecting harshness, all propaganda collapsing through wool and warmth and Americans being decent without being told to be decent. The morning after, processing the experience. The next morning, the women wake warm for the first time in months of captivity. The blankets made the difference between uncomfortable cold night and reasonably comfortable sleep. They fold the blankets carefully, treating them with reverence, handling them gently, placing them neatly at the foot of their bunks. These are not just blankets. These are evidence of American kindness. These are physical proof that propaganda lied. These are tangible demonstrations of consideration received from enemies who noticed suffering and responded with help. Captain Walsh arrives for morning processing. She notices the blankets and understands immediately what happened. She's served with Chen long enough to know he notices things and helps people without being asked. She's not surprised he brought blankets, but she is interested in how the Vietnamese women respond to that kindness. Through the interpreter, Walsh asks Han, "I see you received additional blankets last night. Were you comfortable?" Han responds with emotion she doesn't try to hide. "We were cold. Your soldier noticed we were cold. He brought blankets to help us. Nobody ordered him to bring blankets. He just saw we were uncomfortable and decided to help. That act of unprompted kindness contradicts everything we were taught about American treatment of prisoners. We expected harshness and received consideration. We expected cruelty and received kindness. We expected Americans to ignore our suffering, and instead an American noticed our discomfort and alleviated it without being told to do so. She continues, tears forming. I was taught for years that Americans are cruel to prisoners, that Americans do not follow Geneva Conventions, that Americans will not show kindness or mercy to Vietnamese, that Americans consider us subhuman and unworthy of consideration. Every lesson I received about American treatment of prisoners emphasized suffering and deliberate deprivation. Nobody told me Americans might notice if I'm cold and bring blankets to help. Nobody prepared me for spontaneous kindness from enemy soldiers. Nobody mentioned Americans might show basic human consideration toward Vietnamese prisoners. That Marine, I don't even know his name, he didn't help us because regulations required it. He helped because he noticed we were suffering and he could alleviate that suffering easily. He helped because that's what people do according to him. He helped because he's human, and we're human, and humans help each other when they can. That simple truth destroys everything I was taught. Americans aren't cruel monsters incapable of kindness. Americans are humans who respond to suffering with help. One blanket taught me that. One act of unprompted consideration destroyed years of propaganda. Walsh listens carefully, understanding the profound impact of Chen's simple action. Corporal Chen has a habit of noticing when people are uncomfortable and helping without being asked. He brought you blankets because he saw you were cold and he had access to blankets that would help. For him, it was simple problem solving. Cold people plus available blankets equals distribute blankets. He didn't think of it as significant. He just saw a way to help and helped. That's who he is. That's who many American soldiers are. They notice suffering and respond with assistance because that's what decent people do. Your propaganda taught you lies about American character. Propaganda claimed Americans are systematically cruel and incapable of kindness toward Vietnamese, but propaganda lied. Americans are humans. Some humans are cruel, but most humans, most American soldiers, are decent people who respond to suffering with help when they can. You experienced that truth through receiving blankets from a soldier who noticed you were cold. That experience contradicts propaganda more effectively than any argument could. You learned truth through direct experience of American kindness when expecting American cruelty. The question about why he helped. During formal processing later that morning, my request to speak with Captain Walsh through the interpreter. She has questions about Chen's actions that she needs answered to process what she experienced. Mai speaks carefully. Captain Walsh, I need to understand why Corporal Chen brought us blankets. I need to understand his motivation. Propaganda taught us that if Americans show kindness, it's always manipulation covering ulterior purposes. That American kindness is never genuine but always serves strategic goals. But I cannot identify what strategic purpose bringing blankets serves. We are prisoners being repatriated. We are leaving soon. Americans gain nothing strategically from making us comfortable for one night. So why did he help us? What was his purpose? Walsh considers how to explain this honestly. His purpose was that you were cold and he could make you warmer. That's it. That's the entire purpose. No ulterior motive, no strategic calculation, no manipulation, just see cold people, have access to blankets, bring blankets to cold people, human decency, basic kindness, spontaneous response to observed suffering. That's the purpose. She continues, I understand propaganda taught you American kindness always has ulterior purposes. That's a common propaganda technique. tell people enemy cannot be genuinely kind, only strategically manipulative. That prevents propaganda targets from recognizing genuine kindness when they experience it. Keeps them suspicious and hostile even when encountering actual decency. But that teaching is false. Humans are capable of genuine kindness toward other humans regardless of nationality or war status. Chen was genuinely kind because he saw suffering and responded with help automatically. No ulterior purpose, just human responding to human need. You said Americans gain nothing strategically from making you comfortable for one night. You're correct. Chen gained nothing except the satisfaction of helping people. He didn't expect gratitude, didn't expect anything in return, didn't think his action would change your opinions about Americans. He doesn't know your propaganda taught you to expect cruelty. He just saw cold people and got blankets. For him, that's not remarkable. That's just being decent. That's what people do according to him. And he's right. That is what decent people do. They notice suffering and alleviate it when they can. That's all. That's everything. Mai processes this explanation, trying to reconcile it with everything she was taught. So Americans can show spontaneous kindness without ulterior motives, can respond to suffering with help simply because helping is right, can be decent to enemies without strategic purpose. This contradicts everything propaganda taught. Propaganda said American kindness is always manipulation, but you're saying American kindness can be genuine human response to observed suffering? Walsh nods. Yes, exactly. Americans are humans. Humans are capable of genuine kindness. Most people, most Americans, respond to suffering with help when they can, because that's basic human decency. That's not manipulation. That's not strategy, that's just humanity. Chen demonstrated that last night. He saw you suffering mild discomfort from cold. He had means to alleviate that discomfort. He helped. Humans seeing human suffering and responding with assistance. That's genuine kindness. That's what propaganda denies exists, but what you experience directly. Another woman, Nguyen Thi Mai, age 25, speaks up. If what you say is true, if Americans can show genuine kindness to enemies, then everything propaganda taught about American character is false. Propaganda said Americans are cruel, selfish, incapable of considering Vietnamese as humans deserving kindness. But Corporal Chen's action proves Americans do consider us human, do respond to our suffering, do show kindness without ulterior purpose. One blanket destroys entire propaganda edifice about American cruelty. One act of spontaneous consideration proves years of teaching about American character were lies. That's profound. That's everything. Walsh responds gently. Yes, that's exactly right. One experience of genuine kindness contradicts systematic lies about enemy cruelty. That's why your propaganda warned you that American kindness is always manipulation. Because if you recognize genuine kindness when you experience it, the propaganda claiming Americans are cruel fails immediately. Your propaganda tried to prevent you from recognizing kindness by teaching you to see all American actions as strategic manipulation. But Chen's kindness was so obviously spontaneous and unprompted that you recognized it as genuine despite propaganda warnings. That recognition destroys propaganda. That's truth defeating lies through direct experience. The comparison to South Vietnamese custody. During afternoon processing, women are given an opportunity to report on their treatment during months of South Vietnamese custody. This is standard procedure, documenting prisoner conditions, identifying Geneva Conventions violations, gathering evidence for war crimes investigations if applicable. Han provides testimony through the interpreter. describing conditions in South Vietnamese facilities. We were held for 9 months in South Vietnamese custody. Conditions were harsh. Minimal food, barely enough to prevent starvation. Contaminated water causing illness, no medical care for injuries or sickness, no hygiene facilities beyond buckets, no bedding beyond thin mats on concrete floors. Cold nights spent shivering without blankets or adequate shelter. Guards who showed no consideration for prisoner welfare. Treatment that deliberately maximised discomfort while keeping us barely alive. She pauses, emotion building. In 9 months of South Vietnamese custody, nobody brought us blankets when we were cold. Nobody noticed our suffering and responded with help. Nobody showed spontaneous consideration for our comfort. Guards followed minimum protocols required to prevent death, but showed no human kindness beyond those minimums. We suffered deliberately because our suffering served their purposes, breaking our spirits, punishing us for fighting, demonstrating their power over us. Then we were transferred to American custody. First night in American facility, Marine Corporal sees we're cold and brings blankets without being asked, without being ordered, without expecting anything in return, just sees suffering and responds with help because that's what people do. In one night, Americans showed more spontaneous human kindness than 9 months of Allied custody produced. Enemy soldiers demonstrated more consideration for our welfare than our own side's allies showed. That contrast teaches everything about who follows humane standards and who violates them. Walsh documents this testimony carefully, understanding its significance. So you're saying that Americans showed you more consideration in 1 day than South Vietnamese showed in 9 months? That your first experience of unprompted kindness in captivity came from an American soldier giving you blankets, hand nods, tears flowing? Yes, exactly. First time in 9 months anyone noticed our discomfort and responded with help. First time anyone showed spontaneous consideration. First time anyone demonstrated that we are humans deserving of basic kindness. And that person was American Marine. Enemy soldier, man we were taught would torture us, man propaganda promised would be cruel. Instead, he noticed we were cold and brought blankets. That act of simple kindness means more than propaganda ever acknowledged kindness could mean. That Marine showed us humanity our own side denied us. That truth destroys everything. Other women provide similar testimony. All reporting harsh conditions in South Vietnamese custody, all describing deprivation, deliberate discomfort, lack of consideration for prisoner welfare, all contrasting that treatment with American treatment, all noting that Americans showed consideration South Vietnamese denied, all understanding that enemies treated them more humanely than allies did, all changed by experiencing kindness from those propaganda promised would be cruel, while experiencing cruelty from those they expected would eventually rescue them. The pattern is clear and disturbing. Allied forces violated Geneva Conventions by denying prisoners basic necessities and consideration. Enemy forces follow Geneva Conventions by providing necessities and showing human kindness. Women expecting cruelty from enemies experienced kindness. Women expecting eventual rescue by allies experienced cruelty. Everything backwards from propaganda promises, everything contradicting expectations through direct experience. And blankets, simple wool blankets given by American soldier who noticed cold people, taught them all of this more effectively than any argument or explanation could convey. The repatriation, what they take home. 2 days later, the women are ready for repatriation. They've been processed, documented, medically treated for conditions caused by South Vietnamese custody. and thoroughly cared for by Americans who demonstrated consistent consideration throughout their brief time in American facility. Before boarding transport, the women are told they can take the blankets Chen gave them. Walsh makes this clear through the interpreter. Those blankets were given to you. They're yours. Take them home. They're gifts from a Corporal Chen who wanted you to be warm. He'd want you to keep them. Mai holds her blanket, tears forming again. We can keep the blankets. They're gifts, not property we must return. Walsh smiles. They're gifts. Chen gave them to you because you needed them. He'd want you to keep them and use them. They're yours. The women fold their blankets carefully and pack them for the journey home. These blankets are more than fabric and wool. These are evidence of American kindness. These are physical proof that enemies showed consideration. These are tangible demonstrations that propaganda lied about American cruelty. These are gifts carrying truth home. Before departure, Han speaks to Walsh one final time. Captain Walsh, please thank Corporal Chen for us. Tell him his kindness meant more than he knows. Tell him that by bringing blankets without being asked, he taught us that Americans are capable of spontaneous human decency toward Vietnamese. Tell him he destroyed propaganda through simple kindness. Tell him we're taking these blankets home as evidence that Americans showed us consideration when our own side showed us cruelty. Tell him thank you for everything, for noticing we were cold, for bringing warmth, for showing humanity, for being decent. Thank you. Walsh promises to convey the message. The women board transport carrying blankets that carry truth. They leave as witnesses to American kindness experienced when expecting American cruelty. They leave as living proof that propaganda lies about enemy character fail when tested against direct experience of enemy decency. They leave changed by blankets, by warmth, by kindness, by Americans being decent without being ordered to be decent. They leave carrying wool and carrying truth, both warm, both precious, both proving that Americans show unprompted consideration, that Americans respond to suffering with help, that Americans treat prisoners with kindness propaganda claimed impossible. Today, the women who remember the blankets. Nguyen Thi Mai is 77 years old now, living in Hanoi. She still has the blanket Chen gave her in November 1972. She keeps it carefully stored, brings it out occasionally to show students, uses it as teaching tool about propaganda's lies and reality's truth. She tells students, "This blanket taught me more about American character than years of propaganda taught about American cruelty. American Marine gave me this blanket because he noticed I was cold. Nobody ordered him, nobody required him. He just saw suffering and responded with help because that's what people do, according to him. That simple act of unprompted kindness destroyed everything I was taught about Americans being incapable of showing consideration to Vietnamese. I was held 9 months by our allies. Nobody brought me blankets when I was cold. I was held 2 days by our enemies. Marine brought blankets first night because he noticed our discomfort. That contrast taught me who follows humane standards and who violates them. Enemies showed consideration, allies denied. Americans demonstrated kindness propaganda claimed Americans don't possess. One blanket proved years of propaganda were lies. I teach students now. Propaganda claims about enemy cruelty fail when tested against experience of enemy kindness. Direct experience defeats lies. This blanket is physical evidence. I show students this blanket and explain, American gave this to me unprompted because he noticed I was cold. No ulterior motive, no strategic purpose, just human helping human. That's truth propaganda tried to hide. This blanket carries that truth. I carry this blanket. I teach truth it represents, forever. Multiple women carry similar testimonies. Han teaches international law, using her experience as example of Geneva Convention's compliance and violations. Lan teaches ethics, using unprompted kindness as example of moral action. Bin teaches history, analysing how propaganda about enemy cruelty fails upon contact with enemy humanity. 52 years of testimony. Dozens of wool blankets preserved as evidence. Thousands of students taught truth about American kindness, contradicting propaganda lies. Reality defeating false teaching through blankets given by Marine who noticed cold people and helped. The numbers. November 3rd, 1972, 15. North Vietnamese women. POWs received blankets, 0 orders requiring blanket distribution. 1 Marine noticing discomfort and responding with help. 20 minutes required to get and distribute blankets. 100% of women shocked by unprompted American kindness. Years of propaganda destroyed by the simple consideration. Contrast with previous custody, 9 months in South Vietnamese facilities. 0 instances of unprompted kindness, 1 night in American facility. Spontaneous help provided without request. Allied custody, deliberate deprivation and disregard for welfare. Enemy custody, active consideration and response to suffering. Long-term impact. 52 years of testimony about American kindness. Multiple women teaching about propaganda failure. Blankets preserved as physical evidence. Thousands of students learning truth about enemy humanity. Reality defeating propaganda through direct experience. 15 women. 1 cold night. 1 Marine noticing. 15 blankets given without orders. Complete contradiction of propaganda through simple kindness. Truth learned through wool and warmth, and Americans showing consideration nobody taught them Americans possess. Propaganda promised cruelty. Reality delivered kindness. Teaching said Americans ignore Vietnamese suffering. Experience proved Americans respond to suffering with help. Lies claimed no consideration. Truth showed spontaneous decency. Everything backwards. Everything contradicting propaganda. Everything taught by blankets. Cold people made warm. Suffering noticed and alleviated. Kindness given unprompted. Truth demonstrated through simple action. Character revealed through consideration. Americans being decent without being told. 1 Marine seeing and helping. 15 women changed forever. Everything learned from blankets. Everything taught through kindness. Everything forever.